Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Sarah. I'm here to talk to you about my new book, which is called Rake's Progress, My Political Midlife Crisis. And it was published into the COVID lockdown on March the 19th.
How is
Sarah?
it in Somerset?
Well, we've had 6 weeks of unprecedented sunshine because usually it rains here all day, every day. And this valley I'm in now I think, has probably the highest rainfall count of any part of the United Kingdom. So we have been spoilt.
Brilliant.
But I presume that as soon as lockdown lifts, it's going to pour with rain.
Of course, although we don't know when that's going to be. So I really enjoyed your book. I listened to it because I couldn't get a copy in the post because of the lockdown. So I listened to it on something called Audible, which was very good. And it was you reading it, which I thought made it even more entertaining. But tell me why you wrote it.
It's a good question. I think I was trying to think of something to do after I had my catastrophic foray into midlife politics, which coincided, as the country knows, with another one of my brothers rising to the very top, like cream of British political life, whereas I sort of sank like the dregs, out of sight within only a few weeks. And I loved the juxtaposition of those two things. And so when it came to it, I went up to an agent at a party and I said, I'd like to write a book about, I've got this idea of doing a sort of diary style narrative about how I was the sort of worst European politician ever and how I destroyed the Remain cause in record time. And her face fell because she thought I was going to write a book about Change UK and about that political party that everyone's already forgotten. Yeah. But I don't think I did write a book about Change UK.
No, you didn't. Actually, you wrote a very funny book, a very good book, I'd say, about that. But actually, it's a book about you and your family as well, I think. And that's what's so fascinating about it, is that I've talked about it with girlfriends who have also read it. And it's great. I mean, given that your brother is Boris Johnson, it explains a lot to people who don't necessarily know him about why he is the way he is. And but it's also a really interesting book, I think, from a woman's point of view, because I think that your experience is very similar to the experience that I've had and a lot of women my age have had, which is it's that we're sort of that funny in the middle generation of feminism where we were expected to have jobs and be productive members of society, but we were also expected to have all the children and sort of look after them. And men treated us just as harshly as they treated their colleagues, but don't give us any credit and never do give us any credit because they think everything is their idea. And I think what's really interesting about your experience is that because you're the second child, aren't you? So so Boris is your older brother, and then there are 2 more. Is that right?
2 more, yeah.
2 more brothers. And I think
but all boys.
Yes, and I think your experience of growing up as a woman, as a girl, and then as a woman, surrounded by these very male characters is really interesting. And there are so many bits in the book where I felt so much that I could identify with your sort of, it doesn't, maybe this is a bit of an exaggeration, but I think you have a bit of imposter syndrome, which I think
a lot of
women have. Tell me whether you think that's right.
Yes, I mean, I still believe that when I got into Oxford, it was a mistake.
Yes.
You know, I'm one of those people. And I still believe when I get a good review that they couldn't have read the book.
Yes.
And, but on the other hand, I have sort of total confidence as well that when I do something, it will be a success. Weirdly, I mean, I wasn't sure this book would be a success, and it's had wonderful reviews, but I'm sure it hasn't sold a single copy.
Well, I mean,
I'm always terribly surprised, but I think a little tiny part of me thinks I need that reaffirmation all the time.
Yes.
That I'm not as terrible as I think I am at absolutely everything.
And do you think that it's really
difficult? I think what you...
Sorry, there's a lag. I do apologise.
No.
Sorry, you go.
No, I mean, I do have imposter syndrome. And I think actually when you become a parent, that's when you have the most dramatic imposter syndrome, because suddenly you turn from being a woman into a mother and you're expected to be absolutely perfect, kind of cupcake baking, World Book Day costume, never losing your temper, never being tired, never being crabby, never giving the children McDonald's, that suddenly, your entire world is like, you're in a sort of weird emotional lockdown where everybody's policing your every single move.
Yeah.
And often it's other members of your family.
Yes.
So, this is partly why I find lockdown incredibly hard, because I don't like being judged by others, and I don't like not being able to do what I want to do. So this is a perfect storm of horror.
But also, I thought what was very interesting in the book was the fact that, right from the start, you supported your husband, didn't you? Because he couldn't work. So right from the start, there you were, being the mother, doing the work, being, you one of the first female journalists to work for the BBC or the FT. The FT. And all of these milestones, which, for me looking in as an objective person, if I looked at your CV on paper, I'd be very impressed. But you seem to, throughout the whole book, just focus on the negative, which is, the Change UK thing. And you're very funny about it. And that's brilliant, because I don't think there's enough comedy in politics. And I'm in politics because I'm married to a politician, Michael Gove. And I know that there is an awful lot of comedy in politics. And it's actually quite a funny business, even though obviously we all take it terribly seriously. But there are lots of moments which are just sort of silly and hilarious and ridiculous and exasperating. And but I did think that I think even if you're not obsessed with politics, which actually I'm not, I still think that the political element in your book is so human. It just makes you realise, that there are people behind all of these things.
That's very kind of you. I mean, I have to say that my husband has always worked, but he did have a life-threatening illness just when I was having very small children. And I feel that almost more than anything, that has defined me emotionally. And it's something I really haven't really talked about. And I don't talk about it in the book because it's sort of almost too emotional for me. And also I haven't really, this is a terrible word, I haven't really processed what it was like.
Yeah.
Being the sort of sole parent during that sort of crisis, when it wasn't just that, he needed a life-saving operation, but it was for 10 years that he wasn't very well. And that was a lot of small children time that I did.
Yes.
And the sheer sheer emotional and physical labor of those 10 years effectively as a single parent. Although, I'd hate him to hear me saying that, because I still feel, that I want to protect him and the bubble idea that we have, that we all pull our weight. But the truth is that women do pull their weight more.
I think that's true. And I think it can be very traumatic if you have something like that happen to you, because I think it must also be very scary, because, presumably the worry about money, which, again, because of your position and because of your family associations, people would assume that, you're just awash in cash. But that's not
just
true.
Such rubbish.
Of course,
that.
I know that, because everyone thinks that, I live in a £20 million mansion because my husband is a politician. But you and I, who live in this world, know that actually it's the opposite. It is a money pit, politics. It is an absolute money pit.
Yeah.
But I think being sort of like that, having to do everything from such young age. You were 23 or 4 when you had your first child?
I was 26, but
26.
I mean, it goes earlier than that, which was that when my parents got divorced, I was 14 and I was the only girl in the household, because I had 3 brothers and a father who was on his own. So I became sort of the cook general and the housekeeper for the family. So, from the age of 13 or 14, I was making supper. And I was saying, we've got to wash up or hoover, or so I've had, and separately from that, my mother's been, it sounds like a bloody hole in the road sob story, but it's not. We've all had our shit.
Yeah.
My mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's when I was 16. So I've been in a sort of caring role from the age of about 14.
What I think is so great about the book is that it makes you into a three-dimensional person. Whereas if you had followed the election campaign and you'd seen, you know, or you just think, you know, you look at the current political situation, and I know what it's like when you're when you have a close relative who's in politics, you sort of become collateral damage for anyone who doesn't like them. But you also become a little bit oddly sort of your own person becomes a bit depleted because everybody sees you through the prism of that person, and I think that's really hard. And from my point of view, you know, this is not about me, but just very quickly, you know, I've tried to maintain an identity as a journalist. You know, I was a journalist from the age of 20. I started in, you know, years and years and years ago. Always worked in newspapers, but it's very difficult to maintain that identity as an individual. And I think it's also very difficult for the children of politicians to do that. Very. And you are both the child and the sister of politicians. And so
how do you police it, Sarah, though? Because I mean, like today, obviously, my brother and Carrie, his partner, have had a baby, and I've had, you know, endless media requests to say something. And I don't want to be a journalist who you know, cannibalizes like a parasite on the life of a sibling. You know, I want to have my own things to talk about. And that's partly why I wrote the book.
Yes, well, and that's what I think it does. And what I think it's very difficult because, of course, you want to say something nice about the fact that your brother's had a baby. Why shouldn't you? That's what every sister would want to say. But, you know, what you don't want to be is just Boris's sister.
I don't want to be a sort of
Rachel Johnson.
Yeah, no, I mean, I try and keep that to an absolute minimum.
But there's always that, for me, there's always that little scratching thing at the back of my head, which says, you know, you may have won awards, you may be, you know, people may say your columns are really good, but actually the only reason anyone employs you or ever speaks to you is because of your husband.
Well, that, you know, that's nonsense.
No, but I
mean, we speak to you despite your husband, who we love.
Very good, yes, we love him. But I think in the book there's an element of that with you as well, which is that you're always trying. I think one of the reasons you do the stuff that you do, and you did the kind of crazy politics thing, was in part to sort of try and put some distance between that. And I found it fascinating. It really resonated with me.
Well, there was that, but also, I mean, I think, you know, that I just think Brexit's not a terribly clever idea. I mean, I understand the sort of ideology behind it, but to me, I think that the family divided into those who'd had a sort of economics kind of FT grounding, who thought that just on a business level, it was a terrible self-inflicted wound. And we didn't really, you know, we didn't get a massive, I can't use this word, but, you know, we didn't get quite the same kick out of the idea of taking back control and sovereignty, because we recognized that, you know, sovereignty was a pooled enterprise when we went in with Europe, and it didn't have that sort of macho nationalistic drive to it. Well, and then there was, I think I talk about this in the book, you know, the beginning of last year when you had those Brexit rallies in Olympia, and you had the really aggressive anti-immigrant rhetoric again. You're very pro-immigrant. I'm very pro-immigrant. This country is going to need more immigrants after Corona, not less. Yeah. And I actually felt a sort of physical need to put up a resistance,
to make a case. Yeah.
Yes, and also to differentiate myself from that narrative. And the way I did that was by standing for an obviously a doomed political party that was never going to really make that much of a difference, but stood for something. And, you know, that
in a funny kind of way, although, you know, perhaps not the right word, to take back control of your own of your own political views and your own persona.
Yeah, and it was difficult because, you know, again, you know, I'm married to somebody who's also a journalist, so he's rather competitive, and then he had applied for Change UK as well and wasn't selected. So, you know, there's always friction on every single...
There were some very funny scenes of you trying to pretend that you hadn't been selected and pretend that you weren't filling in the form, while he was sitting there asking you about, how should I fill in this form? I'm not filling in any form for any political party. No, not me. I'm not doing that. That was all very funny.
But I tell you what,
you're a very good.
It's a wonderful inoculation. You know how people say having babies is a fantastic
Yes.
contraception.
Yes.
Standing for political office is a terrific inoculation, as you must see, because with Michael having to stand again and again, the sheer grinding, exhaustion, unpleasantness of it, and the way people think that because you're trying to stand for public office, you're on the take, you're a bad person, you are an absolute target for their criticism, and you get absolutely no credit.
No.
You wonder why anybody does it.
It is. You're right to say it's a bit like childbirth. You know, you can try and explain to somebody what it's like to have a baby, but until you've actually done it, it doesn't, there's just no way of explaining it. And it's the same being in politics. Until you've actually done it, you can't understand just how difficult it is on an emotional and human level. I think, particularly now, I mean, maybe 20 years ago it wasn't like that, but I think now with social media, you know, it's very hard.
I agree. I mean, would Mrs. Thatcher have become Prime Minister with Twitter? And
I doubt it very much.
It's an interesting question, isn't it?
I doubt it very, very much. I mean, I think that the kind of people now who survive in politics are probably, quite a lot of them are not the sort of people who should be in politics, if that makes any sense. Because in order to survive in politics, they have to be a very particular type of person who can survive the sort of the Twitter mob. I think it was
also, what I realized quite soon was the boredom of it. I mean, unless you actually had your hands on the levers of power, I couldn't quite get it, because we've had these wonderful careers where we've basically done what we like, and people don't tell us an awful lot what to do. Whereas politicians are under the whip all the time.
Yes, I mean, you're owned. People feel they own you as well. And you know, there is that thing whereas my husband always says to me, that for him, the difficult part about being in politics is that when someone cuts you up at a junction, you can't just tell them to, you know, because you can't, because otherwise, oh, hello.
Sorry, we just got a child coming in the recording.
That's fine. We all have children.
This is the child. Watch out, this is the dog.
This is the new puppy.
Yeah.
How's it doing? Hello.
Ziggy. She's all right. She needs training. She's a Cocka-poo.
She's the best. God. They're very sweet, but they're quite thick.
Oh, she seems quite smart, but very willful.
Oh, good. Remember, maybe when I say thick, I mean hard to train.
Hard to train. No, she's not bad.
Should I give her?
Give her dinner if it's 6 o'clock. Yeah. I can't believe you listened to the audio book. It's 6 hours of your life.
It was quite funny. I enjoyed it. I listened to it on my phone. You read it well, I thought. Yeah, definitely. So are you going to do another book, Rachel?
I don't know. I might do. How's your book going?
Oh, terribly badly. Well, I've got this thing that I've decided that no one wants to read it, so I can't write it anymore. I mean, as you know, I was going to write my equivalent of your book, which is a sort of...
Please, I'm waiting for it.
Which is sort of memoir, but with a sort of, you know, built around the sort of whole Brexit thing and seen from a completely different point of view to yours. But I don't know. I've written quite a lot of it, but I had a terrible crisis of confidence and thought, oh, you know, no one's interested in me.
No, that's not true. Why don't you, all you need really is a sort of format. What's the format?
Oh, the format's fine. I've got it all, it's all mapped out. It's pretty kind of, it's not that the format's missing.
I'd read it.
Yes, I don't
read it.
It's quite difficult because I think that your book, there's a sort of full stop, isn't there? Which is that you do the thing and then it ends. Whereas mine is more of a sort of live issue.
Yes.
It's sort of ongoing, you know.
I tell you something. One of the spurs for me writing my book was thinking that you were writing yours. And I was kind of going, I wonder how Sarah Fine's doing. And I was
well, there you go.
Oh, God.
Sarah Fine's sitting there staring at the wall, whereas you managed to actually get a whole book out.
What's so weird is I don't remember writing the book at all.
Really?
No,
Do
it's
you think
gone.
really? Well, it's very funny because that happens to me. I write articles and then people say to me, wow, that piece you wrote on XYZ, that was interesting. And I honestly can't remember ever having written it. I think it's...
But I've written novels where I can't remember any of the characters or the plots.
That's brilliant though. But I'm the same. It's almost as though my brain can only sort of sustain a finite amount of information before it has to dump it.
But I have no memory of actually sitting down, and obviously when you write a novel, it is like giving blood or breastfeeding.
Yeah.
It's blood out of a stone novel.
It is.
But this just poured out.
Yes.
I tell you the way I did it. I just made, and I don't do this anymore, but I would make notes every day on my iPhone.
Yeah.
So if I was going on a train or something, I'd say, person behind me said, Michael Gove is something or other, and that would be funny. And I just only the things I thought were funny.
Yeah.
But
did you make notes during the process? You did?
Yes. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I did them on my iPhone.
So before even you decided to write the book, or you decided that...
Yes. As I realised quite quickly that Change UK was peaked on the day it was launched, I did what I always do, which is if something pretty ghastly is happening in my life, I turn it into copy. Nora Ephron, everything is copy.
Yes.
And it somehow gives it an extra dimension that gets me through it.
Yes.
And the fact that I hadn't sold the book at all until well after the whole thing came to an end, a sticky end. But it was the same as when I was at the Lady magazine, and it was, you couldn't imagine that a genteel 19th century women's weekly could generate so much drama and so many headlines. And of course, so I started taking notes and had to interrupt a novel to do that. So I get a sort of feeling in my waters when something is happening that could make a diary type. So I've done now 3. This is the 3rd and probably the last, because I don't think anything interesting is going to happen to me ever again.
I think that's highly unlikely.
The other tip I have, if you've got a sort of personal type book inside you that you think could be comical, is when you write it down. I have a kind of twingy reflex, a humorous twingy reflex in my stomach, and it happened a few times with Rake's Progress, but it happened all the time with the Lady book, because that was just mad beyond words. I mean, 7 impossible things happened before 11's every day.
Yes.
The boss's mother coming up from Deerbolt's Hall and trying to push me down the stairs or something like that. It's just copy just flowed.
Just flew. But when you I have to ask you this question because how has your family reacted to Rake's Progress?
There's been studious silence from most of them, because so many other bigger things were happening than my book. My launch party was cancelled. My tour and all my events were cancelled, which was probably providential, because I don't think my father likes it. He's been quite upset by it, and my mother likes it, and my husband likes it. That's it. So my children
like it. Well, that's the thing. I can see why your mother likes it, because I suspect that a lot of your experiences were also your mother's experiences, judging by the sort of sound of the family life.
Well, I tried very hard not to be too critical of anybody, because my basic principle of life is you can't blame anybody for anything.
No, but so hard trying to write a book inevitably in which your family feature while all your family are still there and going to read it.
Well, I don't know if they have read it. Do you think that it was a kind book?
I do think it was I think it was a very affectionate book, actually.
Yeah.
I think it was very affectionate, particularly about your very competitive brothers, and also about your father. And then I just got a lot of admiration about your mother.
Oh, Well, no, I mean, I worship them all, basically.
Yeah.
But, you know, I couldn't do a sort of soft soap.
No.
Max Hastings wrote a piece in the Times the other day about memoir and about how politicians should or shouldn't write memoir.
Yeah.
And he finished the piece by saying, above all, be honest.
Yes.
And I honestly think there's just no point in the exercise at all,
no,
unless you're honest. And therefore, I have to deal with the fact that what I said wasn't a press release when it came to...
No, and I think there are some bits in it.
Figures.
Yeah, and I think that there are definitely some bits in it which are not extremely flattering, and I think that's quite courageous, because I don't think I would have the balls to do that, actually, to people who, you know, I was going to have a telephone conversation with afterwards.
Well, don't worry, they have made me suffer for it. No bad deed goes unpunished in the world.
Yeah, but I mean, on the other hand, you know, sometimes it's difficult when you know, tell people about themselves and you tell the truth about them. It's very hard.
I think that awful phrase, it's my truth.
Yeah.
And I think what happens where the friction arises is when you write memoir, you write about other people, they're alive, it's your truth, but it's not the same as their truth.
Yeah.
And your recollection of events, as any witness statements prove, is very different from theirs.
Yes, and I've had that in books that have been written in which I have popped up even in a minor role, and I've really not recognized that version of events, and it's very upsetting, actually, sometimes, because you can sort of you realize that you've completely misunderstood the other person, or that they've completely misunderstood you. Do you know what I mean?
Do you remember the bit at the end of the book where I actually tell very few family anecdotes, and I tried to pick out the old chestnuts that had already slightly been in the public domain, like World King, or going to an all boys boarding school as an only girl, or, you know, things that maybe I didn't want to ruin the book for anybody, but I didn't want to do a My Family and Other Johnsons, but I wanted to choose a few anecdotes when the book was called My Life in Politics as a joke, because I haven't had a life in politics apart from those few months. But I told a story at the end of the book about how I felt I'd completely failed and picked a fight that I was never going to win. And I tell the story of how we had this system where we all slept in a shed.
Oh, yeah.
We had to sleep on a different camp bed every night, and we rotated the camp beds because some were more uncomfortable than others. And the deal was you moved each night, and then my brother Leo, peed on the bed that I was due to sleep in that night. And sometimes I dig in, and I very rarely dig in. I'm quite easily bullied, actually. But I felt it was deeply unfair and unjust that I would have to sleep on the orange bed which Leo had peed on. So I tell this story in the book, how I ended up having to sleep on it. And the brothers all corrected me, and they said, no, it wasn't Leo who peed on the orange bed. You, in their memory, I'd peed on the orange bed. And then I became angry all over again. Of course I hadn't peed on the orange bed. You know, it goes on. Leo was literally 2 years old, and we slept in a shed at the bottom of the garden.
Yes.
People don't realise we actually had quite a rough and tumble upbringing, but I hope...
No, I think it comes across definitely in the book, yes.
I didn't posh or rich or smart or any of those things, you know, but you can't ever say we're not, because people always just decide you are.
No, people make their minds up about you based on sort of a raft of assumptions. That's it. And the trouble with that is that because we live in a social media age, once they've made that decision, that's it. They never revise it. So there's no point in you complaining. I mean, I've long since stopped complaining about what people say about me, because, you know, I've been cast as Lady Macbeth, as, you know, all kinds of things. I don't really care, because at the end of the day, my real friends know what I'm like. And if you want to have a fantasy that I'm wandering around in a long black gown plotting the death of many people, then that's fine by me. That keeps you happy. That's all right. Doesn't bother me. You can do that.
God.
So, but it is very difficult. And I think both of us have, I mean, you've grown up in the shadow of politics, but also powerful men. And they are a nightmare. Let's be honest. The powerful.
Well, I don't think my brother is a nightmare, or my father. I think given how sort of annoying I must have been at times, I think they've been fantastically generous. I mean, if there's any one of my family who will tell it as he sees it, it's Joe.
Yes.
You know, he doesn't do the whole kind of, oh, everything's fine, you know, everyone must do their own thing. Joe's got very, very firm views on things one does and things one doesn't do. And on that, I might say that one of the reasons why I really try and not do much more family stuff is that Joe's really had it up to here of Johnson's talking about Johnson's, and I'm on board. I'm really on board with that. The problem is that, you know, my brother generates enough world headlines in a week that most world leaders generate over a course of an entire career.
Yeah, he is to headlines what Pigpen is to dirt. He just sort of walks into a room and stories just kind of attach themselves to him.
I know, but if you think about the last 3 weeks, the last 6 months, you know, no, wins a leadership election, wins a general election, stonking majority, totally unexpected, you know, set fair for 10 years, coronavirus hits, almost kills him,
Divorce.
Has a baby. Oh, sorry, missed out the divorce.
Yeah.
Coronavirus hits, almost dies, baby following week. I mean, how much copy for one biography does Tom Bauer need?
I know, it is extraordinary. He's a one man sort of, I mean, he's had the whole gamut of the human experience in the last 3 weeks, hasn't he? Let's be honest. It's bizarre. It's really strange.
I might feel exhausted just thinking about 1 minute of his day.
It is. Yes.
Do you want to give me some of your book recommendations before we go for lockdown?
Oh,
apart from my book, obviously.
Apart from your book, obviously.
I'll tell you the book while you're thinking. I'll tell you the book I want to do. I want to interview the author of next. I've just read Craig Brown's book on the Beatles.
Oh, is that good?
Which is like the most wonderful box of chocolates. And
I'm going to read. That's a great recommendation. I actually read the Elton John book about Elton John, which was actually really good. He's actually a very good writer. I would recommend that. I'm just trying to think, because I tend to just reread old books. So I've been reading a lot of old ghost stories, you know, M.R. James and things like that. That's what I like.
Read Amanda Craig's Golden Rule, which is coming out, and that's very good.
Okay, no, I will take that, definitely.
And she's an extremely good modern novelist. I'm reading Hadley Freeman's book about anti-Semitism.
Yes, I've heard that's very good.
Very good, which sort of tells the whole story of European anti-Semitism and the Nazis through the vector of her own family.
Yeah.
It makes it sort of, it's a bit like Anne Frank's diaries, but just a whole family.
Yes.
They're highly recommended.
Yes, I will take that.
I want also Amelia Gentleman, my sister-in-law's book on the Windrush portrayal, which did poor Amber Rudd.
I've heard that 50 Cent is doing a book. He's doing a self-help book. Apparently it's already #1 in the self-help charts.
Oh, I think what I'd like to do next is write a column about me and my puppy for Mail.
For Country Life magazine?
No, for the Mail.
Oh, for the Mail?
Yeah. Ziggy and me.
Me and my puppy.
Me and my puppy. Because it would be a very clever way of writing about my life without actually it being about my life.
Absolutely.
Clever?
Yes, very clever. I shall ask. I'll ask the powers that be.
Go and see the new baby and things like that with the puppy.
The puppy can talk to Dylan about his new status, his new downgraded status.
Dylan and Ziggy can also get married.
Are they the same? Are they? Is that doable? Is that interbreeding?
I think dogs aren't that fussy. I have to go.
Okay, enjoy. Very nice to speak to you.
Very, very much. Thank you for having me.